Lucas Carter, CEO of Carter International, was facing one of the most crucial nights of his career. His multinational company, valued in billions, was drowning in scandals over abusive working conditions and unethical practices. Investors were pulling out, and the press relentlessly attacked his lack of empathy. That night's gala dinner was his only chance to restore the company's reputation and convince key investors to trust in his leadership once again. Every detail had to be flawless. As Lucas mulled over his strategy, Logan, his assistant, interrupted him. "We have a problem." Julian canceled. Lucas looked up from his computer, his expression tightening. "What do you mean she canceled?" "Family emergency." "She's not going to the dinner," Logan explained. Julian was Lucas's ideal choice for the event. Charming, experienced, and someone who projected the image of success he desperately needed. Frustrated, he asked, "So what do you suggest?" "We don't have time to find someone else." Logan hesitated before offering a solution. "Maybe someone from the team?" Lucas scoffed at the idea. It seemed absurd. But with time running out, his gaze shifted to the lobby outside his office window. There, he noticed Stella Taylor, the receptionist. She was calmly organizing packages with a composed and professional demeanor. Her simplicity and discreet elegance stood out to him. "Bring her here now," he instructed Logan. Moments later, Stella entered Lucas's office, trying to mask her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. "Mr. Carter," she greeted cautiously. Lucas studied her as though evaluating a product. "I need you to accompany me to a gala dinner tonight. It's an important event for investors. Your job is to smile, be polite, and above all, not say anything unnecessary." "Understood." Surprised, Stella hesitated. The request felt more like an order, and she wasn't paid for such responsibilities. Still, she recognized this as an opportunity. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite her uncertainty. "Make sure she looks presentable." "Something sophisticated?" Lucas directed Logan. "We meet at 7 p.m. Don't be late." At 7 p.m., Stella was ready. She wore an elegant dark blue dress that highlighted her confidence, though she still felt out of place. Lucas, waiting impatiently in the car, nodded in approval when he saw her. "You learn to follow orders quickly. Let's go." The car ride was heavy with silence. Stella tried to understand why she had been chosen, while Lucas mentally rehearsed his pitch to the investors. When they arrived at the luxurious hotel, Lucas turned to Stella. "Remember, discreet and professional. Nothing more." Stella didn't respond, but inside, she resolved to prove she was more than just a receptionist. As they walked through the grand entrance, Stella felt the eyes of dozens of investors on her. She knew that night would be pivotal, not just for Lucas and Carter International but for herself as well. The Grand Plaza Hotel was a spectacle of luxury, with sparkling chandeliers illuminating a crowd dressed in impeccable attire. Lucas projected his usual cold confidence, while Stella, though visibly nervous, maintained an elegant posture. Curious glances followed them as they entered, many assuming she was a hired companion. "Don't leave my side," Lucas murmured without looking at her. "Of course, sir," Stella replied, keeping her tone professional. Soon, a group of influential investors approached, led by Henry Hayes, a critical magnate known for his progressive views. Lucas greeted him with a firm handshake, but Henry's attention shifted to Stella. "And who might this young lady be?" Henry asked, his polite smile tinged with curiosity. Before Lucas could intervene, Stella answered confidently. "Stella Taylor. I work at Carter International." Lucas frowned but said nothing. "Interesting," Henry remarked, clearly intrigued. "And what do you think of the company's current situation?" The weight of the question was heavy. Stella knew it could be a trap, but she also saw an opportunity. "Every company faces challenges," she began carefully. "But I believe real change comes when the focus includes human impact." The group fell silent, surprised by her response. Lucas, visibly uncomfortable, pursed his lips. As the evening continued, the discussion shifted to social responsibility. Lucas spoke in terms of profits and numbers, but Henry, dissatisfied, turned to Stella again. "Miss Taylor, what's your opinion on regaining public trust?" Stella felt Lucas's tension but answered with conviction. It takes more than marketing strategies. It requires listening to employees and customers, understanding their stories, and investing in actions that go beyond numbers. This creates a genuine connection with the public. The room was silent until Henry laughed. Finally, someone with an interesting perspective? Other investors murmured in agreement. Lucas, irritated, tried to steer the conversation back. Stella isn't familiar with large-scale leadership challenges. She's here to observe. Sometimes an outside perspective is exactly what we need, Henry countered, smiling. By the end of the evening, Stella had captured the attention of several investors, who praised her clarity and courage. Lucas, however, barely spoke to her on the drive back. "You completely ignored my instructions," he finally said, gripping the steering wheel. "I just answered questions," Stella replied calmly. "I didn't do anything wrong." Lucas's frustration was palpable. "You drew unnecessary attention. That's unacceptable." Stella didn't respond but knew she had impressed the right people. She stared out the window, sensing that the night had changed everything, for better or worse. When they got into the vehicle, Lucas broke the silence. "You completely ignored my instructions?" Stella turned to him, her voice calm. "I just answered questions. I didn't do anything wrong." Lucas gripped the steering wheel, visibly frustrated. "You drew unnecessary attention. That's not acceptable." Stella didn't respond. She knew she had crossed a line, but she also knew she had impressed the right people. She gazed out the window as the car moved through the lit city streets, a quiet certainty settling within her. That night would change everything, for better or worse. The next morning, Carter International's office buzzed with tension. Stella arrived punctually, but the air was thick with whispers. Some colleagues looked at her with curiosity, others with approving smiles. She knew, however, that the only opinion that mattered was Lucas Carter's. At 9 a.m., a message appeared on her computer, *Stella, in my office. Now *. Taking a deep breath, Stella stood and walked to the CEO's office. The door was slightly ajar. Lucas stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Without turning around, he said, "Sit down." She complied, keeping her composure. "You disobeyed my orders last night, Stella. I told you to be discreet. Not only did you ignore that, but you became the center of attention." Frowning, she responded firmly, "I answered the questions I was asked." "I did nothing wrong, Mr. Carter." He turned to face her, his expression impassive. "It's not your place to decide what is or isn't wrong in this context. Your job was to accompany me, not to share your opinions." Stella felt anger bubbling up but held it in check. "If my answers helped improve the company's image with the investors, then I played a positive role." Lucas tapped the desk lightly, signaling the end of the conversation. "You don't get it. I can't afford more distractions. You're fired." The word hit her like a bomb. She had anticipated this outcome but still felt the sting. Instead of protesting, she stood, her demeanor steady. "Understood," she said, her voice calm but resolute. Without another word, she left the office. That afternoon, as she packed her things, her phone rang. Seeing an unknown number, she hesitated but answered. "Miss Taylor, this is Henry Hayes. Could we meet for coffee? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Recognizing the name of one of the investors she had impressed at the gala, Stella agreed. An hour later, they met at a nearby cafe. "I'll get straight to the point," Henry began, folding his arms. "Carter International needs new leadership, especially in its European division. I was impressed with what you said last night and believe you have the right profile for a significant role there." Stella blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the position of CEO of the European division. The board will need to approve it, but that's just a formality." She hesitated, the weight of the offer sinking in. It was grand, almost too good to be true. After being underestimated for so long, the opportunity to lead and make a real impact was irresistible. "I accept," she said with determination. 2 days later, Lucas Carter received news that left him furious. Henry Hayes had nominated Stella Taylor as CEO of the European division, and the board had quickly approved. Though technically subordinate to the general board, Stella now held a position of significant influence, one equal to Lucas in many ways. When Lucas learned he would need to attend a meeting led by Stella to align directives between divisions, his irritation was palpable. The day of the meeting, Stella arrived at Carter International's headquarters with renewed confidence, dressed elegantly and armed with a well-prepared presentation. In the conference room, Lucas sat surrounded by other executives. "Miss Taylor," he greeted with a forced smile, or should I say, "So Taylor?" "Just Stella is fine, Mr. Carter," she replied coolly before beginning her presentation. During the meeting, Stella outlined plans to implement ethical and transparent practices. Some executives supported her ideas, while others, aligned with Lucas, resisted. After the meeting, Lucas approached her privately. "Impressive presentation," he said, his tone dripping with irony. "But I hope you realize it won't be easy to implement these ideas." Stella didn't flinch. "I never expected it to be easy, but I know how to deal with obstacles, Mr. Carter." They locked eyes, tension thick in the air. Neither was willing to back down, though a strange mix of respect and rivalry was evident. As Stella left the room, Lucas couldn't shake the determination in her gaze. Dealing with her, he realized, would be far more complicated than he had anticipated. For Stella, taking on the role of CEO of the European division was just the beginning. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, many of them coming directly from Lucas. But her resolve to drive meaningful change and prove her worth was unshakable. Lucas, meanwhile, found himself conflicted. Stella's courage both threatened his authority and sparked a reluctant admiration. A confrontation between them seemed inevitable, yet it was clear their dynamic would shape the future of Carter International in ways neither had anticipated. Stella called a video conference with the division executives, including Lucas, to discuss plans to align all units with a new corporate conduct code emphasizing social responsibility and transparency. True to form, Lucas joined late, adjusting his tie as though the delay were deliberate. Stella began her presentation, explaining the importance of the new code. "This will require significant cultural changes, but I believe it's essential to regain public trust and retain top talent," she stated calmly. Lucas crossed his arms, waiting for his moment. When Stella opened the floor for questions, he was the first to speak. "This sounds very idealistic, Stella," he said, his tone heavy with sarcasm. "Have you considered how this will affect operational costs? The last thing we need is to compromise our budget with initiatives that might not bring returns." Stella kept her composure, though her eyes gleamed with determination. "Numbers are just part of the problem, Mr. Carter. Right now, our greatest cost is the damage to our reputation. Every cent invested in transparency will be recouped through restored market trust and better employee retention." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room, and Lucas realized he was losing ground. When Stella outlined the practical steps for implementing the code, including audits across all divisions, Lucas interrupted again. "Internal audits? Sounds like we're preparing to dig more holes than we can fill." Stella replied firmly, "We've been digging these holes for years, Mr. Carter. Ignoring them won't make them disappear." The tension in the room was palpable as the other executives exchanged glances, clearly divided. At the end of the meeting, Stella concluded, "I understand that change is uncomfortable, but if we want to survive in the current market, we must look beyond short-term profits. This is a long-term decision." Lucas remained silent, but his expression made it clear that the battle was far from over. After the meeting, Lucas intercepted Stella in the hallway. "Do you really think you can give me orders?" he said, arms crossed. Stella stopped, assessing him before replying. "I'm not giving orders, Mr. Carter. I'm proposing changes that benefit the company as a whole. If that feels like a threat to your authority, perhaps the problem isn't with what I'm proposing." Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Careful, Stella. You're treading on dangerous ground." She didn't back down. "Don't underestimate me, Lucas. I've been fired before for speaking my mind, and it didn't stop me from getting to where I am now. If you think intimidation will work, you're underestimating the wrong person." They locked eyes in silence, the air thick with unresolved tension. Lucas felt a mix of frustration and admiration for her resolve, while Stella sensed the fear behind his arrogance. a man clinging to control. In the following days, the tension between them was palpable. Stella focused on implementing changes in the European division, while Lucas used his influence to slow her progress. Despite the challenges, Stella gained the support of other executives with her straightforward approach and willingness to listen, a stark contrast to Lucas's authoritarian style. By the end of the week, Stella received notice of a board meeting called by Lucas without informing her. She knew he was planning something but felt prepared to face him. The next day, Stella arrived early to the conference room, her demeanor calm and professional. As board members filed in, Lucas entered last, his expression self-satisfied. "Good morning, everyone," he began once the room had settled. "I've called this meeting to address concerns about the financial impact of the new policies we're implementing." Stella recognized his strategy immediately, discredited her by painting her proposals as impractical and risky. Lucas presented graphs and charts, highlighting projected costs associated with the audits and cultural changes she had proposed. When he finished, all eyes turned to Stella. She stood calmly, picked up a marker, and approached the whiteboard. "Let's talk about real costs," she began. On one side of the board, she listed financial losses from lawsuits, reputational damage, and employee turnover over the past 3 years. On the other, she wrote the estimated costs of implementing the proposed changes. "Now let's be honest," she said, facing the board. "Which of these costs seems more sustainable in the long run?" The room fell silent, save for murmurs of agreement. Stella continued, "Ignoring these issues is not a viable strategy. We need to address them now or risk further damage to our credibility and opportunities." Several executives nodded in agreement, including Robert McCain, a senior board member who rarely spoke. "Stella's right," he said. "We've ignored these problems for too long. It's time for a responsible approach." Lucas attempted to counter, but Robert's influence was significant. One by one, other executives began siding with Stella. By the meeting's end, it was clear that Stella had won the board's favor, leaving Lucas simmering in frustration. But Stella knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Lucas had lost much of his support within the company, but he showed no outward sign of frustration. Instead, he gave Stella a calculated look before leaving the room, as though already planning his next move. Over the following weeks, Lucas worked behind the scenes. He rallied allies, delayed budget approvals for Stella's initiatives, and justified his actions as financial precautions. Stella, however, saw through his tactics and understood they were meant to sabotage her efforts. She refused to back down. Stella sought direct board support and explored creative solutions to bypass Lucas's roadblocks, keeping her projects moving forward. Each obstacle he placed in her path only strengthened her resolve. During one tense weekly meeting, Stella presented early results from a pilot audit at a European branch. The findings showed a significant increase in employee satisfaction. Lucas interrupted, his tone cutting. "What about the impact on profits? Are you intentionally leaving that out?" Stella met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm presenting measurable results. Financial numbers will be included in the quarterly report, as they always are." "How convenient," Lucas replied, sarcasm dripping from his words. Stella took a deep breath before responding, her tone firm. "What's convenient, Mr. Carter, is using financial objections as an excuse to avoid necessary changes." The room went silent, the tension almost tangible. Stella's strength left an impression on everyone present, but the rift between her and Lucas only deepened. Their rivalry extended beyond the office. At a corporate leadership panel where both were invited to speak, Lucas used his time to make a thinly veiled critique of Stella's approach. "Leadership is about firmness and clarity," he said. "You can't always please everyone, and tough decisions need to be made." When it was Stella's turn, she spoke with calm conviction. "Leadership is also about adaptability and empathy," she countered. "The greatest leaders don't ignore change, they embrace it and use it to grow stronger." The audience noted the tension between them, captivated by their dynamic. Beneath the confrontations and provocations, an unexpected respect began to form. Stella admired Lucas's strategic mind, while Lucas found himself impressed by Stella's determination and vision. Their exchanges grew sharper yet more charged, hinting at something unspoken. One evening, as Lucas sat in his office reviewing reports, he found his thoughts drifting to Stella in a way that unsettled him. At the same time, Stella, working late in her own office, realized that her perception of Lucas was beginning to shift despite their friction. Their dynamic took an unexpected turn during an urgent business trip to address strategic issues at a European branch. As the primary stakeholders, Stella and Lucas were assigned to travel together. The flight began in silence, with Stella engrossed in documents while Lucas gazed out the window, lost in thought. Eventually, he broke the silence with a provocation. "Ready to face tough questions?" he asked. "I'm always ready," Stella replied without looking up. Lucas gave a slight smile, intrigued by her quick response. Upon arrival, they discovered a significant issue at the branch. Productivity numbers were below expectations. Local managers claimed that Stella's proposed changes had caused resistance among employees. "I warned you that drastic changes could cause resistance," Lucas said pointedly. "Now we're dealing with the consequences." "It's not the changes causing this," Stella countered. "It's the lack of communication. We need to listen to what the employees are saying." Determined to address the issue, Stella organized a feedback session with the branch workers. Lucas reluctantly joined. Initially tense, the meeting revealed that many employees felt disconnected from leadership and fearful of the new policies. Stella listened carefully, offering adjustments that balanced employee concerns with company goals. Lucas couldn't help but admire her ability to mediate conflict and foster collaboration. That evening, over dinner at a local restaurant, the atmosphere between them shifted. For the first time, their conversation flowed without sarcasm or provocation. "You were impressive today," Lucas admitted after a long silence. Stella looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. "I didn't know you were capable of complimenting someone." He smiled, slightly embarrassed. "Neither did I. But when I see something exceptional, I have to admit it." Stella relaxed, her tone softening. "Sometimes you surprise me, Lucas. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human." They both laughed, the tension between them replaced by something lighter. Yet beneath the levity, they both knew the moment carried a deeper significance. The next day, a technical issue forced them to work late. When they finally finished, a storm stranded them in the branch office. They waited in a small lounge, sharing coffee and conversation. For the first time, Stella saw a vulnerable side of Lucas as he spoke about the pressures of being CEO and the sacrifices he had made. "Sometimes I feel like everything I've built is meaningless," he confessed, staring into his coffee cup. "Maybe the problem is what you chose to value," Stella replied gently. He looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "And you, Stella?" he asked, his tone softer now. As the rain poured outside, Lucas asked, "Why are you still here, facing all this?" Stella smiled thoughtfully. "Because I believe I can make a difference. And despite everything, I believe you can too." They sat in silence, the sound of the rain filling the space between them. But the closeness between them was unmistakable. When their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. Lucas was the first to look away, but the moment lingered with him long into the night. Something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't easily ignore. In the days that followed, Lucas and Stella worked together to address the branch's challenges. To their surprise, their partnership began to flow more smoothly. Though they still exchanged occasional provocations, there was a growing sense of camaraderie between them. One evening, after a particularly productive meeting, Lucas walked Stella to her hotel. As they stood at the door, he hesitated. "Stella," he began, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable, "I need to admit something." She tilted her head, intrigued. "What is it?" "You make me question a lot of things, about myself, about how I've been running my life." Stella was silent for a moment, her gaze steady but warm. "Maybe that's not a bad thing, Lucas." As Stella entered the hotel, Lucas remained at the door, watching her disappear down the hallway. He knew he was falling for her, but admitting it, to her or himself, was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Back at headquarters, Lucas was more restless than ever. Since the trip, his relationship with Stella had undeniably changed. The rivalry that once defined their interactions had softened into mutual admiration. But acknowledging these feelings meant relinquishing control, something Lucas wasn't accustomed to. Stella, meanwhile, tried to maintain their professional boundaries. Yet, the moments they'd shared during the trip stayed with her, and she couldn't deny that her view of Lucas had shifted. She no longer saw just the arrogancio, she saw someone complex, someone wrestling with his own inner battles. The tension between them reached its peak during a meeting. Stella presented a new initiative to improve employee transparency through significant investments in training and benefits. Lucas waited until she finished before speaking, his tone measured but critical. Stella, this is ambitious. But have you considered the financial impact? We're in a slow recovery. Adding more costs isn't feasible. Stella remained calm. We've already shown that investing in employees increases productivity and reduces turnover. This isn't a cost, it's a strategic investment. Strategic? Lucas retorted, his sarcasm sharp. It feels more like a risky gamble that could push us further into the red. Stella met his challenge head-on. So what's your alternative? Continuing the same strategies that got us here in the first place? The room fell silent as the other executives watched the clash. Lucas finally sighed and leaned back in his chair. Do what you want. But don't say I didn't warn you. Later, Stella stormed into Lucas's office without knocking. He was staring at a report, though it was clear his mind wasn't on it. Can we talk? She asked, crossing her arms. Lucas looked up, startled, but gestured for her to sit. What now? Why are you making things so difficult? She demanded. You know what I'm proposing is best for the company. Lucas set the report aside and stood, walking to the window. After a pause, he spoke quietly. Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control. Stella blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean by that? He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. Since you got here, you've challenged everything I thought I knew about leadership, about myself. And it's driving me crazy. Stella's heart raced, but she kept her composure. Maybe it's time to stop fighting it, Lucas. Maybe it's time to figure out what it means. He chuckled softly, though it lacked humor. And what does it mean, Stella? Their eyes met, the tension between them thick and electric. Stella didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. That night, as Stella left the office, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Lucas standing there, looking uncharacteristically unsure. Stella, he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. She stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. You've changed everything, he admitted. I don't know if I'm ready for it, but I don't want to fight it anymore. Her heart pounded, but she kept her gaze steady. So what do you want to do, Lucas? He stepped closer, narrowing the space between them. I want to stop pretending I don't care. I want to be honest about how I feel. Before she could respond, Lucas reached for her hand, a quiet question in his gesture. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in, and their lips met in a tender kiss. It was filled with all the unspoken emotions and tension they had been carrying for weeks. When the kiss ended, Stella stepped back slightly, still holding his hand. This changes everything, she whispered. Lucas nodded, his expression serious but resolute. I know. But I think we're ready for this change. Stella wasn't sure if Lucas was right, but something inside her told her this was worth the risk. As she headed home that night, Lucas's intense gaze lingered in her mind. Something had shifted between them. The kiss had broken down barriers but hadn't resolved the tensions that lay beneath. Their relationship now stood on uncertain ground, and both were acutely aware of how precarious the situation had become. The next day, Stella threw herself into her work, determined to remain professional. Lucas did the same, equally resolved not to let his emotions interfere with the company's future. Yet fate seemed determined to test them. A week later, Stella received an anonymous email with a confidential attachment. Inside were old documents detailing unethical practices Lucas had overseen years ago. Though the actions were in the past, the potential fallout from public disclosure could be catastrophic for Lucas and the company. The knot in her stomach tightened as she debated what to do. Confronting Lucas meant risking the fragile trust they were building, but ignoring the documents went against everything she stood for. Stella decided to wait for the right moment to address it. Lucas, however, noticed her distance. During meetings, her professionalism never wavered, but her demeanor hinted at inner turmoil. One day, as they passed in the hallway, he stopped her. "Stella, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Just focused on work." He narrowed his eyes, sensing there was more, but chose not to press further. Days later, during a board meeting, chaos erupted. The documents Stella had received had been leaked to the press, and headlines accusing Lucas of unethical behavior began circulating. The boardroom was in an uproar as executives demanded explanations. Lucas sat frozen in shock. His mind raced to figure out how such sensitive information had been exposed. Then his eyes met Stella's and realization dawned. "Was it you?" he asked in a low, accusing tone. Stella's face paled. "Of course not. Do you really think I'd risk everything like this? You knew about these documents, didn't you?" he pressed, ignoring the others in the room. Stella hesitated. "Yes, I knew. But I didn't leak them." Lucas shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "You should have come to me. You let this happen, and now you want me to believe you had nothing to do with it?" Before Stella could respond, a board member interrupted. "We need solutions, not arguments. Carter, this could destroy your reputation and the company." The meeting ended abruptly, but the tension between Lucas and Stella was far from resolved. Later, Lucas stormed into Stella's office, slamming the door shut behind him. His frustration was written all over his face. "You should have trusted me," he snapped. "Instead, you kept this hidden like a weapon." Stella stood, meeting his anger head-on. "Do you really think I'd do anything to harm the company? I received the documents anonymously and was trying to figure out how to handle them without causing a disaster. And you caused exactly what you were trying to avoid," he shot back, his arms crossed. Stella took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "You know what your problem is, Lucas? You don't trust anyone but yourself. You can't see that people around you might actually want to help, not threaten your precious control." Lucas stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. "And you don't understand what it's like to carry the weight of all this. It's not just a company, Stella, it's my life." She didn't back down. "Maybe it's time you stopped acting like it's all about you." The silence that followed was heavy. Lucas finally stepped back, shaking his head. "I think I made a mistake. I shouldn't have mixed personal with professional." Those words cut Stella deeply. Her chest tightened as she crossed her arms. "Maybe you're right." Lucas left without another word. In the days that followed, they barely spoke, focusing instead on the crisis at hand. The silence between them was unbearable. Stella couldn't ignore her lingering feelings for Lucas, despite her anger. Lucas, for his part, missed Stella's presence more than he cared to admit. When the investigation into the leak concluded, the truth came to light. A longtime executive and former ally of Lucas had leaked the documents to weaken him and stage a bid for power. Relieved but guilt-ridden, Lucas knew he owed Stella an apology. One evening, he appeared at her office, looking uncharacteristically unsure of himself. "I found out who leaked the documents," he began. Stella looked up, surprised. "It wasn't you," he added, his voice tinged with regret. She remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I was wrong to doubt your loyalty," Lucas admitted. Stella's expression was calm but firm. "You doubted me because you've never seen me as an equal. That needs to change, Lucas." He nodded, acknowledging her words. "You're right. And I want to change, if you'll give me the chance." Stella studied him for a long moment before replying, "I'll think about it." Though the wounds were fresh, both knew the conversation marked an important step toward rebuilding trust. A week later, a gala event for Carter International's top investors and partners presented an unexpected opportunity for reconciliation. As Stella prepared for the evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that it might be a turning point, not just for the company, but for her and Lucas. It was a dazzling evening set in a meticulously designed garden. Soft lights twinkled in the trees, casting a warm glow, while the gentle strains of classical music floated through the crisp night air. Stella arrived alone, a picture of poise and elegance in a sleek black gown that accentuated her presence. Her hair was swept into a refined bun, and the faint smile on her lips seemed to draw every eye in the room as she stepped into the gathering. Lucas, mingling with the crowd, paused mid-conversation as a wave of murmured admiration rippled through the guests. Turning, he saw her, and his breath caught. Tonight, Stella seemed different, almost ethereal. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated him, it was the quiet strength and confidence radiating from her. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, laughing and engaging with guests in a way that made her magnetic. For the first time, Lucas felt truly vulnerable. He knew he had to talk to her. For hours, Lucas observed Stella from a distance, unable to gather the courage to approach her. Finally, as she stood by a table in conversation with a group of investors, he made his move. As he neared, the group dispersed instinctively, leaving the two of them alone. "Stella, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Stella hesitated, her eyes meeting his with a knowing look. "Sure." Lucas led her away from the bustling event to a quieter corner of the garden, illuminated by delicate fairy lights and flickering candles. The gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and the faint melody of music created an almost dreamlike atmosphere. Underneath an arch draped in flowers, he turned to her, visibly nervous. "You look beautiful tonight," he said softly, the words escaping unfiltered. Stella offered a small, composed smile. "Thank you, Lucas. But I'm sure you didn't bring me here just to tell me that." He laughed lightly, shaking his head. "No, not just that." He took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything that's happened between us and how messy things have gotten." Stella crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "I was an idiot," Lucas admitted. "Doubting you was my biggest mistake. But it's not just that," he added, stepping closer. "Since the moment I met you, you've challenged the way I see the world, and it terrifies me." Stella blinked, taken aback by his candor. "Lucas?" He cut her off gently. "Let me finish. You make me want to be better, Stella. And I don't know how to deal with that except to say that I need you. In every way." Before she could respond, Lucas leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was deep and sincere, an outpouring of everything he had been holding back. His hands cupped her face with a tenderness that made the moment feel fragile, precious. Stella kissed him back, her emotions swirling in a way she couldn't quite define. When they finally parted, the world around them seemed to pause, the only sound their slow, steady breaths. Before they could speak, an assistant hurriedly approached. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an urgent matter that requires your attention." Lucas sighed, reluctant to leave but knowing he had no choice. He looked at Stella, his expression full of unspoken emotion. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be back as soon as I can." Stella nodded, watching as he walked away, her heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. When Lucas returned minutes later, his face was tense. "What's wrong?" Stella asked, instantly alert. "One of the investors is taking advantage of the recent turmoil," he said grimly. "They're trying to acquire a significant share of the company to sway the board against me." Stella's brows furrowed. "Who is it?" "Henry Hayes," Lucas said reluctantly. Stella felt a jolt of disbelief. Henry had always been an ally, supporting her initiatives and the company's progress. "That makes sense," she said slowly. "He's always been calculating, but I didn't think he'd go this far." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I don't know how to handle this without creating more damage." Stella placed a hand on his arm, meeting his eyes. "We'll handle it together, Lucas." Over the following days, Stella and Lucas worked tirelessly as a team to counter Henry's scheme. They rallied board members, built alliances, and crafted a strategy that not only protected Lucas's position but also fortified the company's future. Through the chaos, their relationship strengthened. Despite the challenges, they began to realize they were better together, stronger as a unit than apart. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting, Lucas walked Stella to her office. At the door, he hesitated, taking her hand. "Whatever happens, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose us." Stella smiled, her heart warming at the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she felt he wasn't just speaking as the CEO but as a man who truly cared. Days later, Stella received a message from Lucas while reviewing reports. It read, "I need you tonight. Be ready for something special, *." Intrigued, Stella arrived at the address he'd sent, an elegant restaurant in the city center. The intimate setting was lit by candles, the ambience warm and inviting. When she walked in, Lucas was waiting for her at a private table, impeccably dressed. "What's all this?" Stella asked as she sat down. "I thought we deserved a break," Lucas said with a soft smile. "Something that doesn't involve spreadsheets, board meetings, or crises." Stella laughed lightly, relaxing into the moment. The evening unfolded with laughter, shared stories, and stolen glances, a celebration of the challenges they'd overcome and the future they were ready to face together. As dinner drew to a close, Lucas's light-hearted demeanor shifted. He set his glass down and leaned slightly toward Stella, his expression serious. "Stella, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his tone weighty. Sensing the gravity of the moment, she leaned in slightly, her eyes searching his. Lucas took a deep breath. "I've been invited to lead a merger with an international company. It's a huge opportunity that could stabilize Carter International for years to come. But it means stepping away, for at least a year." Stella felt her chest tighten. "And you want to accept?" she asked softly. "It's not about wanting," Lucas replied, his voice laced with resignation. "It's about what's best for the company." Stella understood the importance of his decision, but the thought of continuing without him by her side felt daunting. "Does this mean we won't have this?" she asked hesitantly, gesturing to the space between them. Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't know what it will look like," he admitted. "But I need you to know, this doesn't change how I feel about you." The next morning, as Stella tried to process Lucas's announcement, a new challenge arose. Henry Hayes, always calculating, had called for an emergency board meeting. During the meeting, he unveiled a proposal to assume Lucas's position during his absence, a clear attempt to consolidate power. Stella arrived determined, her resolve unshaken. As Henry presented his thinly veiled criticisms of the current leadership, she interrupted him. "With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, your bold vision seems to overlook the values we've worked so hard to rebuild. This company doesn't need power grabs, it needs consistency and integrity." Henry smiled, though irritation flickered in his eyes. "And who would you suggest provide that consistency? Yourself?" The room fell silent. Stella felt the weight of every gaze in the room, but she met Henry's eyes unwaveringly. "If necessary, yes," she said, her voice steady. After the meeting, Lucas called Stella to his office. He had already heard about her declaration. "Did you really say you'd take over the company in my absence?" he asked, a mix of surprise and admiration in his tone. "I won't let Henry turn this company into chaos," Stella replied firmly. "We've worked too hard to build something solid. I won't let him tear it down." Lucas stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "You know this means more pressure, more challenges." "I know," Stella said, her determination unwavering. "But it's worth it." Lucas gazed at her for a long moment. "You're incredible, you know that?" Stella smiled faintly. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." The night before the board was set to vote on the leadership decision, Lucas invited Stella to meet him again. This time, he took her to a secluded pier where a sleek yacht awaited. "I thought we could use some fresh air before making big decisions," he said with a soft smile as the boat glided across calm waters under a canopy of stars. As they talked about their plans and uncertainties, Lucas suddenly stopped mid-sentence. He turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Stella, there's something I want to ask you before I leave," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Her breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple yet stunning ring. "I know we started off complicated," he began, "but you've changed the way I see the world, and myself. I don't want to lose that. I want you by my side, no matter where I am. Stella, will you stay with me? Not just at the company, but in life." Stella's heart pounded as tears welled in her eyes. "Are you proposing?" she managed to whisper. "Yes," Lucas said, his voice steady. "Will you marry me?" Her smile answered before her words did. Yes, Lucas. But reality hit quickly. The next morning, Stella returned to the office to face mounting challenges. Henry Hayes was relentless, holding emergency meetings to undermine her authority. During one particularly tense session, Henry slid a folder across the table. Perhaps you can explain why some of your recent projects are over budget, he said with a smug smile. Stella opened the folder to find falsified data. The figures had been manipulated, a calculated move to discredit her. These numbers are inaccurate, she said firmly, locking eyes with Henry. If someone is tampering with reports, they should reconsider before this goes public. The room tensed. Henry said nothing, but the flicker of unease in his eyes betrayed him. Meanwhile, Lucas found himself distracted by thoughts of Stella as he prepared for his upcoming departure. Though his meetings with the merger team were grueling, he couldn't shake the feeling that leaving now might be a mistake. Determined to support her, Lucas made an unexpected decision. Late in the evening, he returned to the office, finding Stella still at her desk, surrounded by papers. She looked up in surprise. Lucas? What are you doing here? I couldn't leave without making sure you're okay, he said, stepping closer. Stella smiled, the weight on her shoulders momentarily lifting. You're not alone in this, Lucas said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. As they stood together, surrounded by the challenges that threatened to pull them apart, they knew one thing for certain. No matter what lay ahead, they were stronger together. When Lucas entered Stella's office, he found her surrounded by stacks of papers, exhaustion etched across her face. I thought you'd take a day off, he said, crossing his arms and leaning against the doorframe. Stella looked up, surprised but relieved to see him. I can't rest while Henry keeps trying to destabilize me. He's playing dirty, Lucas. Lucas stepped closer, gently taking her hand. You're not in this alone, Stella. I'm here to make sure he doesn't cross the line. She sighed, some of the weight lifting from her shoulders. Thank you. But I can't lean on you for everything. If I want to lead, I need to stand on my own. Lucas smiled slightly, admiration glinting in his eyes. You already are. And you're doing it better than anyone could have imagined. That evening, Lucas invited Stella to dinner, hoping to give her a break from the relentless work pressures. They chose a quiet restaurant, a peaceful escape from the office chaos. Over candlelight, their conversation turned personal. Have you ever thought about where we'd be if that night at the gala hadn't happened? Lucas asked, a teasing glint in his eyes. Stella laughed softly, shaking her head. We'd probably still hate each other. Or pretending to hate each other, Lucas corrected, his playful smile making her laugh again. Their moment of lightheartedness was interrupted by Stella's phone buzzing. Seeing it was a trusted executive, she hesitated before answering. Stella, you need to get back to the office. Something urgent has come up, the voice on the other end said. Stella sighed, looking at Lucas apologetically. Looks like our break is over. Back at the office, Stella discovered new leaked documents, this time outlining internal plans for the company's future. The media had already latched onto the story, and investors were demanding answers. As she reviewed the files, it became clear the leaks were designed to shake confidence in her leadership. Lucas scanned the papers and clenched his fists. This is Henry's doing, he said firmly. He's trying to destroy you and consolidate power on the board. Taking a deep breath, Stella steadied herself. Then we need to act before he succeeds. They spent the night working side by side, analyzing the data and crafting a strategy to expose Henry. Despite the tension, their bond deepened as they found comfort in each other's presence. Do you realize you're handling this better than I ever could? Lucas said, pausing to look at her. Stella glanced up, surprised by his candid praise. I never thought I'd hear you say that. He smiled. You amaze me every day. By dawn, Stella uncovered the proof they needed, a series of emails from Henry to a journalist detailing the leaked documents and his next moves. She turned to Lucas, holding the printed emails triumphantly. We've got him, she said. Lucas's smile was a mixture of pride and admiration. I knew you would. The office was silent as Stella and Lucas pored over the incriminating emails. Each line reinforced Henry's calculated attempts to sabotage them. Relief was brief, though, as they knew the fight ahead would be treacherous. If we expose this the wrong way, he'll retaliate, Lucas said, his voice low. We need to make sure there's no room for him to defend himself. Stella's resolve sharpened. Then we need allies. People who know what he's capable of and who understand what's at stake for the company. Lucas nodded, impressed by her clarity. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance to secure the board's trust and neutralize Henry. They spent the next few hours compiling a detailed dossier of the evidence. The clock neared midnight as Stella closed the final document. You should rest, Lucas said, walking over to her. Stella smiled, tired but determined. I can't rest while he's still out there. Lucas gently cupped her face, his eyes locking onto hers. You don't have to do this alone, Stella. We're in this together, remember? For a moment, she allowed herself to lean into his support, nodding slightly. It was strange to accept help, but with Lucas, it felt natural. The next morning, Stella and Lucas arrived at the office before anyone else. They called an emergency meeting with key board members who had remained undecided. When the group gathered, Stella took the lead, holding the dossier firmly in her hands. Thank you for coming early, she began, her voice steady and commanding. What I have to share is difficult, but necessary. She presented the evidence, outlining how Henry had leaked sensitive information to manipulate decisions and undermine the company's stability. The board listened in stunned silence, absorbing the gravity of her findings. When she finished, Robert McCain, one of the senior board members, cleared his throat. This is very serious, but we need to confirm that this evidence is authentic before taking any action. Stella nodded, her resolve unwavering. I expected that. I've already arranged for an independent review of the data. But know this, if we don't act now, the damage will only grow. Lucas stepped forward, his voice steady and supportive. Henry's actions don't just threaten leadership. They threaten the future of this company. We owe it to our employees, our investors, and ourselves to ensure the company's integrity. As the board deliberated, Stella and Lucas exchanged a glance. The road ahead would be difficult, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The boardroom at Carter International was packed, yet the tension rendered the space eerily silent. Stella Taylor stood at the head of the table, clutching a dossier filled with evidence that could change the company's future. Beside her, Lucas Carter exuded quiet strength, his piercing gaze fixed on Henry Hayes, who sat reclining in his leather chair, a confident smirk masking the unease brewing within him. Stella took a steadying breath. Her voice, calm but commanding, broke the silence. Over the past weeks, Carter International has faced internal challenges threatening our integrity and leadership. Today, I present evidence that these threats didn't come from outside, they came from within this room. She opened the dossier and began her presentation. One by one, incriminating documents appeared on the screen, damning emails, manipulated financial reports, and records of leaked confidential information, all traced directly to Henry. With each revelation, murmurs among the board grew louder, and Henry's smug demeanor began to falter. This is absurd, Henry scoffed, standing abruptly. These documents have been manipulated. There's no proof tying me to this. Lucas leaned forward, his tone steady but sharp. Manipulated? We have digital records verifying the authenticity of every piece of evidence. This isn't opinion, Henry. It's fact. Henry let out a strained laugh, his composure slipping. What are you going to do? Kick me out without a proper investigation? You need me to stabilize this company. Stella rose to her full height, meeting Henry's gaze directly. We don't need someone who prioritizes personal gain over the company's well-being. Carter International has thrived despite your sabotage, not because of it. The room buzzed with whispers, the tide clearly turning against Henry. Desperately, he glanced around, seeking allies, but none came to his defense. Robert McCain, the senior board member, stood, his expression grave. The evidence speaks for itself. I propose an immediate vote to remove Henry Hayes from his position and forward this information to the authorities. The vote was swift and unanimous. Henry's face darkened with resentment as he realized his defeat. He left without a word, sparing Stella one final, venomous glare before disappearing through the door. When the room emptied, the weight of the moment finally hit Stella. Relief mingled with exhaustion as she sank into a chair. Lucas approached her, his hands warm and steady as they clasped hers. "You did it," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "You saved the company." She smiled wearily. "I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you." Lucas leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "We make a great team." That evening, Lucas whisked Stella away to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the glittering city skyline. The air was cool, and the soft lighting created an atmosphere of calm and celebration. As they toasted to their victory, Lucas reached across the table, taking her hand. "You know, after everything we've been through, I'm not going anywhere," he said with quiet conviction. Stella laughed, shaking her head. "I thought you were determined to lead the international merger." Lucas sighed, his smile tender. "The merger can wait. What we've built here, what we have together, it's more important." Her heart swelled at his words. Lucas, the man who had always put work above all else, was choosing her, choosing them. Before she could respond, he leaned in, kissing her softly. The kiss held everything words couldn't express: a promise, a future, a partnership. Months later, Carter International was thriving. Stella's leadership had brought not only financial success but also a culture of integrity and collaboration. She led with strength, tempered by empathy, earning respect and admiration from everyone around her. Lucas had settled into a more supportive role, a change that reflected his evolving understanding of leadership. He had learned that true leadership wasn't about control but about trust and inspiration. Together, Stella and Lucas had rebuilt Carter International into a powerhouse, stronger than ever before. As they stood together at the company's annual gala, surrounded by a team that believed in their vision, Lucas whispered to Stella, "This is just the beginning." Stella smiled, her eyes reflecting the same determination that had carried them through every challenge. Together, there's nothing we can't handle. And as they faced the future, they knew it belonged to them. One evening, as they worked late at the office, Stella glanced over at Lucas. "Do you regret staying?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with curiosity. Lucas paused, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He took a step closer to her, his gaze soft but unwavering. "Never," he said, his voice warm with certainty. "Staying was the best decision I've ever made." They stood there for a moment, the weight of their shared journey between them, the quiet comfort of each other's presence settling around them. In the months that followed, both Stella and Lucas underwent a transformation. Carter International thrived under their combined leadership. Lucas's sharp strategic mind and Stella's human-centered vision created a perfect balance, and the struggles of the past were now only a memory. Their connection, once born of necessity, had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them had expected. Lucas had always prided himself on his ability to lead, to stay composed, but Stella had changed that. She had taught him that leadership wasn't just about control, it was about opening your heart and allowing others to lead with you. Stella didn't just reshape his business perspective, she reshaped his life. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, the city lights sparkling in the distance, Lucas looked at Stella with an expression of tenderness that made her heart skip a beat. "Stella," he began, taking her hand gently in his. "From the moment I met you, you challenged everything I believed in. And it was the best thing that could have happened to me." She smiled, touched by the sincerity in his voice. She had expected something more casual, but the depth in his words made her heart race. "I can't imagine my life without you anymore," he continued, his gaze locking with hers. "You're my partner in everything, work, life, and whatever's ahead. So, I want to ask you." He paused, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small ring and held it in front of her. "Will you marry me?" Stella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in surprise. She knew they loved each other, but she hadn't expected Lucas to propose in such a spontaneous and intimate way. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Lucas. I will." With a smile that could light up the room, Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, and they shared a kiss. The city, shimmering in the background, witnessed the most special moment of their lives. Months later, their wedding day arrived. The ceremony was simple yet elegant, held in a beautiful garden surrounded by white flowers, beneath a bright blue sky. It was an intimate affair, with close family, friends, and key colleagues from the company. The atmosphere was one of joy, celebration, and love. Stella, radiant in a classic lace dress that subtly highlighted her natural beauty, walked down the aisle toward Lucas. He stood at the altar, his heart pounding. He had never imagined he would find someone who completed him so perfectly. And yet, here she was. As she walked toward him, their eyes met, and in that instant, all the challenges, all the struggles they had faced, seemed to fade into the background. Every step she took was a reminder that their love had been forged in adversity, and every step was worth it. When it came time to exchange vows, Lucas's words filled Stella's heart. "Stella," he said, his voice steady with emotion, "you're not just the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. You're the reason I believe love can transform everything. You've shown me that true strength lies in sharing, trusting, and growing together. I promise to stand by your side through every moment, easy or difficult. You are my home, my partner, my love." Tears rolled down Stella's cheeks as she held his hands firmly, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Lucas," she said, her words resonating deeply in her heart, "you've shown me that even the most guarded hearts can open. You've taught me that strength isn't just about overcoming challenges, it's about facing them together, hand in hand. I promise to love you every day of our lives, support you in all your choices, and build a story worthy of what we've started together." As they exchanged rings, the guests erupted in applause, but for Stella and Lucas, the world had faded away. The officiant declared them husband and wife, and Lucas leaned in to kiss Stella, sealing their promises for a future filled with love, trust, and partnership. The reception was filled with laughter, music, and heartfelt speeches. Lucas, usually reserved, surprised everyone with his own words. "I want to thank everyone for being here today, but more than that, I want to thank Stella for transforming my life. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I hope everyone here finds something as special as what I found with you." Stella embraced him, her heart full, as they shared a slow dance under the soft glow of garden lights. The guests looked on with smiles, knowing that this was a love story for the ages, one built on trust, challenge, and above all, deep love. As the evening drew to a close and the last of their guests departed, Stella and Lucas found themselves alone in the garden, bathed in soft moonlight. No words were necessary. They simply held hands, knowing that together, they could face anything that came their way. Do you think Stella was right to forgive Lucas? Share your opinion in the comments below. Rate the story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on all our stories.